Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I take no pleasure in speaking against my friend and colleague, Representative Alders, but the matter before us today is of grave importance, and I really want to impress upon the members of this body how important it is. I was grateful that Representative Alders sought to clarify the terms of the debate. Because carbon dioxide, ladies and gentlemen, is not about clean air or clean water. It is about releasing a gas into the atmosphere that traps heat. And you may not believe in climate change, but you should believe in the laws of thermodynamics. That when energy changes through combustion and carbon is released into the atmosphere, it traps gas in our atmosphere, and that gas acts like a convection oven. And we're cooking in that convection oven, ladies and gentlemen. And you don't have to take my word for it. You don't even have to take the word of the people who have trained all their lives in climatology that are part of the consensus at the IPCC, the international consensus that this is happening. I would trust Texas's own NASA, because NASA can tell, because it is their job, that the amount of parts per million of carbon in our atmosphere is at historic levels. In fact, human activities have raised the atmosphere's carbon dioxide by 50% just in the last 200 years. And so by voting in favor of this HJR, ladies and gentlemen, you're simply handcuffing your children, my children, your grandchildren from trying to decarbonize the atmosphere. You are putting shackles on them to try to deal with this very important existential problem. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it is very, very important that we give them as many tools as possible to deal with decarbonization, either at the federal level or, as this HJR speaks to, at the state level. And in fact, this HJR is socialist, because what it seeks to do is allow companies that release carbon to privatize their profits, and guess what they're doing to the costs? They are socializing them to you, to your constituents, to your children and your grandchildren, because carbon doesn't work like ozone, where it burns off. Carbon stays in the atmosphere for decades. In fact, there is still carbon in the atmosphere from the first industrial revolution. It stays up there. It has a very long half-life, and it stays up there, and it bakes and traps heat and causes us to bake. In fact, if we passed this socialist HJR, because it is socializing costs to all of you and not creating a system whereby
Ms. Isaac,
I do not yield for questions at this time.
Not at this time.
Whereby we cannot place a cost on that socialization. We can't say, hey, you're socializing costs not only to all of us, but to our children and grandchildren. We need to put a cost on that, and we need to recoup it. I remember that acclaimed Texan James Baker, who was Secretary of State under George W. Bush and Secretary of Treasury under Ronald Reagan, came up with the conservative case for a carbon tax and carbon dividends. He, along with Henry Paulson and George Shultz, even Bob Walton, the founder and the founding family of Walmart, the world's largest retail and energy employer, they said we should have a carbon tax on that socialized cost, and then we should pay it back in the form of dividends to the American people. If you pass this, you do not allow for that very conservative approach to occur. And here's the other thing, members, that you need to know. Energy companies want a carbon tax. ExxonMobil wants a carbon tax. Shell and BP have advocated for a carbon tax. You would be foreclosing their ability to impose a very conservative solution on the socialization of costs to all of us. So members, it is for those reasons that I urge you to vote against this HJR. Your children and grandchildren will ask, where were you when this vote was taken? Where were you,
Mr. Speaker,
in foreclosing the opportunity for all of us to have tools to deal with the devastating effect? I do not at this time.
Not at this time.
With the devastating effect of severe weather, with droughts, with hurricanes, with tornadoes, all of it. And you are shackling them by doing so. So please vote against.
Ms. Isaac, for what purpose?
does the gentleman yield for questions?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
For my esteemed colleague, Representative Isaac, of course.
The gentleman
Thank
yields.
you. Did you know, or I want to know, if you support net zero H2O?
Can you describe what that is?
Say it again.
Can you
Water?
Can you describe what that is?
Water?
I know what H2O is, but what is net zero H2O? Can you elaborate?
So, did you know that water is 6 times more prevalent in the atmosphere and traps more heat than gas?
Okay, so if you look at the HJR, it doesn't talk about a regulatory regime for water. It talks about a regulatory regime.
But I'm asking you, do you think we should get rid of water too?
I'm speaking about the measure that we have in front of us, Representative, and it deals with carbon. It does not deal with water, so I'm speaking to that issue.
Did you know that a monitor in Hawaii said that the effects of man-made CO2 emissions do not appear to be strong enough to cause systematic changes in the temperature fluctuating during the last 200 years?
Which monitor is that? Because NASA has a monitor in Hawaii and has reached the opposite conclusion. And I trust the scientists at NASA rather than some unnamed monitor.
I'll get you the monitor later.
Thank you. Thank you. Members, please vote against the HJR.